Hello! Welcome to the Crate and Crowbar. This is episode 596. I'm Philippa War, and joining me today is Chris Thurston.
It's episode 270.
I was close.
Yep, close enough. It's the 2nd of February.
Is it?
2019. Yeah,
cool.
Believe so. Because that was the date on the milk. And I was like, need to throw that out soon.
Oh, we could drink it.
You could, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's just it's health bar slashing red.
Oh. Well, I mean, but surely you go by smell rather than...
Oh, yeah,
date.
ultimately. But it's a helpful, you know, it teaches you to pay attention to the smell as soon as you see that date coming. Shouldn't have to explain sell-by dates, but really.
Well,
Speaking of things that are past their sell-by date, must apologise for this episode being slightly late this week. We had a bit of a availability, not happening event. And, then it snowed a lot.
oh yeah. And you'd think that would confine us to the house. And kind of it did. So we didn't record the podcast. I'm not helping.
Anyway, we've done it now. And I hope you've enjoyed it. That's it. No.
I went out.
You did? We've
Yeah.
both been out.
It was nice. Lots of birds. And you can see them because all the leaves are dead. So they're kind of just like hanging out.
Nowhere to hide now.
I know.
Idiots.
I mean, yeah. Perfect weather for me. Pip.
Good. So what we're going to do on this episode of the Crate and Crowbar is much what we would always do, which is talk about computer games. No, don't be like that. Why don't you start, Pip? What have you been playing lately?
Well, this got aggressive question.
That's,
Why don't you start?
that is not how I said that at all, and I believe the fact that we've recorded this will bear me out.
It's what you meant, though.
No, I just thought you'd be a logical place to start because we were just talking about very cold environments,
I
weren't we?
played Subnautica Below Zero.
Yeah.
It's in early access. It only just came out. I've already finished the story that's in there so far. And there are baby penguins. They're called penglings, I think. But yeah, and they've got like heads that open up, kind of like if a puffin beak was also your head.
That went
It's
from...
very cute,
Oh.
but also a little bit... what's the thing where its face divides into three and it might eat you?
Give me some context.
Possibly in a horror film.
Oh, I know what I'm thinking of. It's Stranger Things monster? Yeah,
Maybe,
the Stranger Things
or
monster.
Nightman.
Nightman.
Dota. A
Night
game I
Stalker.
have played for 2,000 hours.
Fighter of the Dayman. Yeah, Night Stalker from Dota 2 would be the other thing you're thinking of.
So they're kind of like that, but cute. Yes.
So when you say they're called penglings,
Yeah.
that's a bit like, have you seen that thing about Benedict Cumberbatch not being able to say the word penguin?
Can he not?
No.
Why
Famously,
can't
he says penguin.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, maybe he doesn't say that all the time, but there's one entire documentary where he can't say the word penguin.
Surely it's harder to say penguin.
Well, I don't...
Does he know what the word is? Has he spelled it wrong?
I think
as
he's been
well?
taken to task sufficiently now that he's been taught the error of his ways.
I see.
But it's worth looking up because it's very funny that it's very funny that nobody involved corrected him.
Anyway.
So this is, to clarify and back things up a little bit, this is an expansion for Subnautica.
It's an expand-alone, I think you'll find.
Oh.
You can buy it separately. Or you could buy one thing on the Steam store and one thing on the Epic store.
Straddle the industry's hottest divide.
If you want to. You might not. I don't know. Anyway, so that's a thing that happened. It is set a year after the events of Subnautica Prime. And as such, it's a bit of a weird one to talk about because I think everything that the plot seems to hinge on so far is kind of spoilers for reveals for the first game. So, and I really would say if you have any interest in Below Zero, like, I think you'll love Subnautica, so play that first.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a weird one. I had to figure out how to actually write some first impressions of it without ruining it for people, which is kind of interesting.
Some fundamentals that aren't spoilers will be the same though, right? You are in the water.
On an mostly aquatic planet, at the behest of a corporation called Altera, and stuff has happened, but the core gameplay is the same. So it's very much about surviving in those waters and gradually building up supplies of things and tools and equipment and improving your diving suit capabilities and things, so that you can gradually go further and deeper and survive more extreme environments and things. I think there's only the one sort of main starter biome that's in there at the moment. It is very much in early access. But there is, it was surprisingly chunky. I think because I remember the early access period for the original game, and it was very much like, you had slightly older artwork, you had, or, like not polished artwork for a bunch of time. You had, like placeholder stuff. You had, like the story wasn't in place for a billion squillion years, It was only towards the end that materialized. So when you boot it up and it tells you this is a very early access thing, expect bugs, expect performance issues, all of that stuff. I wasn't expecting an experience to be as robust as it is. It did feel very much more like a vertical slice. There were some things where, like the markers of not finished, like, there were some placeholder things, and there were, bits where, that thing where the subtitles don't quite match the voice lines because something has been changed and it hasn't been updated on one side to reflect it. So it was things like that, but, and some of the animations were a bit off, that kind of thing. But overall, like it felt exactly right in terms of it is Subnautica, but in a different, it's called Below Zero because you're in an Arctic type region, or Antarctic perhaps. And so it's more about seeing a lot of, so the loops are familiar, and then you've got a mixture of familiar and unfamiliar fish and plants and things like that. So it feels very much like you are in the same world, but in a slightly different part of it, which is really nice. I really like it. And if you are terrified of the sea, this will not help you in any way, shape or form.
I was going to ask about that because I met Tom Jubit, who wrote Subnautica, and I said, I sort of explained ocean willies to him, which is something we were talking about a year ago on this podcast when Subnautica 1 came out. That fear of the deep ocean, or the fear of large things under the water, particularly.
I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, I get it. I think John Roberts, this is what people, a lot of people, there are dozens of us.
I only found this out when I was evangelizing this game, and people would look at me and say, but that sounds like a horror game. And I'm like, no, it isn't, because I can't play horror games. I'm too scared. So this clearly can't be a horror game.
Yeah, no, it's because you're not afraid of the terrifying ocean leviathan that could eat you without even noticing that it was eating you.
I think the only sort of fear I've had in those games has been more the jump scare type thing, like if something has properly sneaked up behind you and you don't know. But just seeing huge creatures and, there's a sense of wonder, or, ooh, I wonder what that is, which has definitely got me killed in game more than once. So I won't spoil the creatures for people, but there are some, I won't spoil them in terms of looks, but there are some that are really fascinating. Like there was a really nice surprise, which I then got close to and it punched me in the face. And there was another thing that I thought, ooh, I'll pick that up because food. And it either stung me or stabbed me. Not sure. Either way, didn't go well.
Shivved.
But there is another one where you can just sort of huff on it for air, which was quite fun.
And it's a fish.
Yeah.
Damn.
So that was kind of cool. Just sort of swimming around. I realised you can pick up the tiny penguin things, but I don't know what to do with them and I don't know how to release them. So I basically have a box of penguins in my habitat and I'm not sure what to do about
They're fine. Just don't look in the box.
Yeah.
I mean, so to finish the thing I was going to say, and when I explained the Ocean Willies, to Tom Jubert, he said I shouldn't play the expansion on account of the fact that the idea is if you suffered the Ocean Willies from Subnautica Prime, then they're back and they're willier than ever. Would you agree with that assessment without spoiling things?
I think you might
be the wrong person to judge.
I'm not the person to ask because I'm just sat there with, childlike delight in the face of death.
Childlike delight and a bag full of penguins.
Yeah, exactly. So to be honest, my reaction when I see something that would possibly scare you would be to go over and go, what are you? Can I pick you up? Can I pet you?
I think if it's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of, it'd be too big for you to have that thought. The Ocean Willies tends to refer to large, looming creatures.
And in the OG, you had
tons of that.
Well, but also some things that would hurt you and some things that wouldn't, that were just enormous, which was kind of cool. But okay, so I would say that I haven't seen anything that is massive in my explorations, but there are also lots of things like twisty ocean cave systems where you can genuinely get really lost.
Oh no.
And I know that some people
I'm desperately afraid of drowning in a narrow passage underwater. Really,
whereas I'm just kind of like, I could go back, but I mean, that thing looks interesting.
It's funny because, I mean, I imagine we'll return to it on a future podcast because I don't want to talk about it loads on this one. But I'm playing lots of Resi 2. I'm loving it, and it might be certainly early game of the year for me. And actually, I don't find it that scary. I find it very atmospheric, but not that scary. But that game is fundamentally about being chased around a big house by a very briskly walking man, which I think would terrify you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be okay with that at all. Whereas, and the weird thing is that I've genuinely been stuck in a small place just by the edge of the sea as the tide came in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe either I'm just like, well, I survived that, I'm basically bulletproof.
You also got stuck in that bin in a forest in winter by yourself that one time.
No, I didn't. I could have done.
Oh, yeah, you did. Yeah.
And I didn't finish climbing into it. And it wasn't a bin. It was a container, a lorry container thing. It just didn't have a ladder to get back out again. And I didn't have phone signal. So I decided not to die alone in a wood on Christmas Day. Thank you. Using the power of my mighty brain.
Nope, this is the bin I don't get in.
Yeah, but when I was little, we had, there's a lot of harbour where I grew up. And so some of the things were, when they try and stop the water, like, eroding it or, like, coming over it by putting loads of those, dynamited lumps of rock, around it. But when you're a kid, you think this is delightful, so you kind of go scrambling around them. And I have legitimately been trapped in parts of that previously, having scrambled into it and not be able to quite scramble back out again as the tide came.
The thing is, you left that experience apparently immune to terror of the ocean, but I almost drowned when I was 13 in the sea, quite badly. And I am very afraid of drowning as a consequence of that. So what I'm saying is,
I'm afraid of pike. If that helps.
Sure.
I won't
There's
go
some
swimming.
pike-like
I
fish
won't
in
go
Subnautica.
swimming in water where I can't see the bottom because I have this deep terror of pike that might eat me. And I know that doesn't really, it wouldn't be true of the actual sea because pike are, land fish, if you will.
What? Rivers,
not salt water, basically. Freshwater.
Rivers, land sea.
But anyway, so I'm more kind of, but that comes from that misunderstanding of pike and pike, where I sort of thought that the fish was a 6 foot long thing that could kill you, but the fish is about a 3 foot long thing, and the pike that is kind of a halberd is a sharp, pointy thing.
That's an inanimate object, yeah.
And it's about 6 foot long. So I thought that pike were sort of bigger than a grown man and could, eat you and kill you.
Often, wielded into battle by a phalanx.
Do you know when I found that out, that they weren't?
I'm going to guess 27.
Last year.
Okay.
34.
Incredible. It's like when I discovered that every Centre Park doesn't have a big dome over it.
You thought it was the Eden Project.
I knew a lot of people.
So, no, because they do have the dome, don't they? But it's where they have the swimming pool and stuff. Like, it's just a part of it, whereas everything else is outdoors and you have to be rained on.
I just thought they were all like that, like 100%, like some kind of weird Bioshocky folly. But I was incorrect, and, the more you know at the end of the day. Yeah, so, would you, having sort of, gone through the main critical path of Below Zero now, did you get the impression that you got through it because it's not finished yet, or because,
Oh, so it's the only, the beginning bits are in place.
Oh, I see.
So it's not like I finished the whole campaign in a day.
I see.
It's that it tells you that everything from this point on is very bare bones and it might be hopelessly broken, and if you do carry on it's kind of at your own risk, so whatever.
Right.
But already things that have happened are like really interesting, and sort of there have been a few twists but weirdly, it's enough to make me think that I don't want to play any more early access, because there's already enough story in there that I would probably ideally want to experience any more of it with the full game available to me.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first game, it was like, cause I went back a few times during the early access period, but it was very much something that I could absolutely mine out the survival side of it.
Yeah.
But because the story wasn't really there and I wasn't doing anything story related, I could go into that when it got to the 1.0 release, and it felt fresh and it didn't feel like I'd ruined it for myself by already having so much time spent in there.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this one, there's more of a risk of that. So what I'm going to do is it will be difficult because I really loved what I played so far, but I am going to step back and I will probably uninstall it just so that I don't, accidentally find myself going, oh, I'll just check it. I'll just see.
Yeah, I waited all the way through till Subnautica actually came out before I played it, and I was glad that I did.
Did you ever get to the end of the...
I think so.
Or did you get scared?
I got really far. I can't remember exactly. Maybe I didn't see the credits, actually, thinking about it. I should go back and finish it before Below Zero comes out. I was pretty, I think I'd finished, the tech tree, if that makes sense. There was nothing else for me to build. It was just...
Okay, so you had all the bits of the machinery and,
tech. I was building the thing you build.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was almost done with that. So, pretty far. But yeah, no, as I said, it was my game of the year for last year, just even on the strength of that 60 hours or however long. Very good. Looking forward to, I'm actually in a way, because there's a lot of things I really like at the moment. I'm quite glad Below Zero is early access rather than another thing on the list. I think I will wait, and that's not a slight on it at all. It's just because I had a good experience with waiting for the first one as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you have an interest in that and haven't played the original Subnautica, play the original Subnautica and see how you get on, especially if you're a bit concerned you might be afraid of the deep sea. It's often on, it's not free on the Epic Store anymore, but it tends to be discounted during Steam sales, and I think it's a certain percentage off while people are interested in the in the expand alone as well. So I would say definitely play it before you play the other if you have an interest in it. And for anyone else, I think if you didn't get on with the first one, you won't get on with this one because, obviously it'll depend on your reasoning, but and if you enjoyed the early access period and whatever you contributed to that, this one looks like it will be, the same kind of shape. And if you are like me, wait, because you will not have the self-control. You need to remove it from your hard drive. You need to sit on your hands. You need to leave the house and electrify your keyboard. That is all my news from below the sea.
Okay, good. I could segue in two different directions from.
How's Sunless Skies?
Oh, it wasn't the one I was going to do because I had a funnier one, but never mind.
Oh no! No,
it's fine.
You do
no.
The
segue's happened.
What's the segue going to be?
It was. I've been playing a game with a lot of pikemen in it.
Oh, okay. But then you didn't segue into that, like, when we were talking about pike.
But I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh.
Because I would have been rudely shifting the attention to a different game. And you still have more to say.
Well, which one do you want to talk about then?
Well, let's talk about Sunless Skies because we've both played it. So this is also a game about not
and then I can leave.
not dying in the ocean this time. Dying in a Victorian idea about space, really.
Cosmic horror.
Yeah, so this is the new Velbeta game. It feels very much like a sequel to Sunless Sea, which makes sense because of the name. But to the extent that Sunless Sea was a spin-off of Fallen London and they all share a universe, this feels very much like and in doing so, Sunless Sea invented a lot of ways of telling those kinds of stories and structures to build around them. This feels very much like
Queen Victoria got reet mad and moved below the sea.
Well, no, London, not in the first one, because the first one's just set outside Fallen London.
Ah, okay.
So, like, Fallen London was still fallen and was next to the undersea, and then you went to explore it. And so there's lots of new mechanics invented to allow you to explore a different part of that world. Sunless Skies is set in space sometime later in the story, but mechanically is very close to Sunless Sea. So it feels more like a direct sequel. It's, much improved and evolved in a lot of ways, but it feels very much like a successor to that game.
Similar in that way to Subnautica and Below Zero then, like.
Yeah, although I think enough has changed for it not to qualify as an expansion. Because obviously,
for sure.
Yeah, because,
But it's interesting that both are sort of so recognisably their thing.
Yeah, right. Like there's a template that was established with both, for sure. And so, like in Sunless Sea, you basically go on expeditions between sort of hub ports. Instead of sailing a boat, you are flying a train. You can ride a boat and fly a train. You're flying a train engine. It's also basically a little spaceship which you fly around with the WASD keys and fire cannons at naughty woodlice and sometimes pirates. And then you fly to different ports, and while you're there, engage in sort of text-based sort of stories and make choices and kind of experience a lot of really lovely atmospheric writing. And that is the kind of the structure of these games, and that is as true for Sunless Sea. I've played 6 hours of Skies so far. I don't know how much you have played of it.
I have played, so it's interesting because, again, I played it while it was in early access, so I did a preview, and so I have a huge chunk of time, but then they reworked the art quite substantially, especially the lighting, and also now it's certainly in the area that you start in, called the Reach, you have sort of predestined or predefined pathways far more.
Yeah.
'Cause it used to be that everything was pretty much just empty space, but with asteroids and things dotting around and ports. So you could actually far more easily go from, as the crow flies almost. Whereas now it's very much that the asteroids have become these big areas of rocky boundary, basically, and you have to go between them, these winding routes.
It's very much a maze, whereas weirdly, even though Sunless Sea was islands dotting an ocean, whereas space in Sunless Skies is very much a maze of rock. Like, if you describe it as space, I think it's not that that's misleading, because it's certainly kind of where it's set, but people never really refer to it as space in the game. It's always referred to as the sky, and it's very much based on a like Victorian sort of science fiction conception of what space might be like. So it's very much unlike, any other space game. There is wind in space and air. You have a bat that you can let out the window of your space train to fly around.
I love that so much. Like, because when you obtain it, or I don't know if there's another way of doing it, but you rescue it from a ship that's about to fall apart that you scavenge from, and it basically acts as if it's doing you a favour and tries to haggle, and then you have to threaten to leave it behind.
And it remains a dick for the rest of the time it spends with you.
I love that bat so much. And I really love how the writing of the bat tells you a lot about the game, you know? Like, I think there was one time I sent it out and it was, you know, the bat returns in what can only be described as a right mood.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a British turn of phrase and such a perfect, you know, slightly mardy kind of, your bat's in a strop.
Is it like, as with other games, it's very efficiently written, which takes a lot of doing, to kind of get the mood across as quickly as it can. The thing, so I reviewed Sunless Skies way back when, and I think it got loads of I never actually played the expansion, shamefully.
Untersee.
The Untersee
I
expansion.
really liked it. Yeah. Submariner, that was it.
I know that I played the console versions, but a lot of my issue, like, I've always really loved the writing atmosphere of Hellbetter's games. I've always had just some problems with the basic mechanics and the loops and the kind of the trading element and the collecting element. And partly because I think they are fine ways of gating your access to stories by showing you clearly what kind of qualities you need in order to be able to choose certain options or whatever. But it can sometimes lead to like farming of story loops for sort of particular assets and things that for me took me out of the world. This, and the other issue I had with Sunless Skies was that actually for a game about text, its sort of text presentation wasn't great, at least initially. It was very much like a small window on the screen, whereas really that's 90% of your investment in the game is in that window. Now that all of that stuff is a lot better. So it's a lot, I've found that just the UI is just miles better. But also the amount of time I found myself making comfortable amounts of progress and feeling like I'm feeling the threat and the danger and the things they want you to feel, but also feeling like I'm getting somewhere and, you know, moving closer to the next goal and stuff, without ever having to, maybe do repetitive loops of content that I've already read, which was a problem I had before.
They had a dev blog ages ago now, about how those core loops were being tweaked and things. So it was very much obviously an issue that had cropped up sufficiently from the previous game that they wanted to try and do different things with it. And also, one of the things that you find quite early on is that you then have access to a bank vault in this one. So rather than having to just traipse around the ocean with everything you want to have about your person, you can also put some of it in your bank vault and access it from some of the other ports. When you want
I've got
to.
that.
So that kind of thing has also been just a little quality of life tweak.
Yeah, I think quality of life is the right word for it. Like, and that stuff I really appreciate because, it's always been an interesting tension with those games that, you know, you want the resources to be important and the things that happen to you on the road between, or in the space between stories to be important. But at the same time, I do think there's a big difference in how interesting your interactions with the game are when you're out just sort of pootling about and when you're in a port exploring a new story. You know, its strength is not as a fly between ports trading things to make more money game. You know, if that's what you want, Elite exists and, you know, or something like that.
It isn't, but once you develop a sense of the world and a fondness for it, or, you know, a sense of, one of the things that I didn't mind and didn't want to lose from the earlier game was that sense of going out and coming back so many times. It was annoying at points, but it also meant that you had such a definite sense of the area you knew incredibly well because you would navigate every single time and it felt like home because it was so familiar, and there was a boredom there at points, but it was also, you know, that built in some ways, that sense. And then you would go out to an area of the map that you didn't know and suddenly something would be slightly different, or it would just be an area that you didn't know well. And I think that one of the the things I wanted to not lose. And I don't think it has, is that sense of familiarity versus the unknown.
Yeah, totally.
Which is good.
I feel like, and it has been a while since I played Sunless Sea, but I feel like, and this is a really good thing, it feels slightly more forgiving in terms of how far you can get with a certain amount of fuel, and supplies and that kind of thing.
To be fair, partly because I'm not reviewing it, I whacked it down one notch on everything, because I know that I want to revel in those stories rather than feel that tension more.
Yeah.
And so I figured, do you know what? I'm going to put not down to the most forgiving, but I thought fuel will last slightly longer and my guns will target slightly more auto good, you know?
Yeah. I just put everything on normal. So I'm judging it based on the just literally not making any decisions set of options.
Oh, for sure.
But I guess like I like the resource gaming feeling slightly more forgiving. Like I have had times where I felt like I'm a little bit far out or in a bit, but I haven't actually been in a real disaster yet, which
I have,
which is, I mean, compared to, you know, cause I think, with Sunless Sea, I think it probably was calibrated a bit too far the other way so that you did, you know, it was nerve wracking to go too far off the edge of the map, but the tension there, and I think the thing that hurt the game somewhat was that off the edge of the map is where the writing you haven't seen is. And so you know, safety also means getting to the point where you're skipping text. And if you're skipping text in a Failbetter game, you're skipping this kind of huge amount of its, you know,
you're skipping the point.
You're skipping the point. So that's all, like, I don't sound too critical of the previous games, but to say that when I came to this, that was what I was looking to see fixed. Like I wanted to be able to get the appropriate atmosphere, but also, make progress and discover things. And I have been. I think, I don't know, Sunless Sea was to an extent, its map layout was procedurally generated.
Yeah.
This one isn't, I don't think.
Well,
or is it?
I think, and I would need to check this, but the original would have a sense of basically, so you would have you'd have London, right?
Yeah, not in Skies, not straight away. It's New Winchester straight away.
No, but in Sunless Sea.
Yeah.
You had London and you had like the areas around that. And then I think other things were broadly, they were assigned, you know, where roughly they would be on the map, but there was change possible within that.
Yeah.
You know, so something that was supposed to be quite northerly and cold would still be northerly and cold, but where exactly it was in relation to other things would change.
Yeah.
And I think in Sunless Skies, what they've done is, you start off with New Winchester and stuff, which is broadly in the center. It's in the center ring of this circular space called the Reach. And then you have other key ports and things. And I think that they are given a designation of, you know, how far towards the center or the circumference they are.
Right.
But they are then, you know, distributed around. And that's partly why I got into a bit of a pickle, because I had played at a demo event, and in my head I'd already got familiar with, okay, Port Prosper is sort of to the northeast.
Yeah.
And I will head there because that's one of the first missions you get. That's kind of part of the onboarding experience, I guess. But in the save file for my own save file at home, when I got the game, the file that I have at the moment generated Port Prosper somewhere over to the northwest. And I'm like, no! So I'd sort of gone off and I kind of couldn't find it. And then I thought, oh, I'll send the bat out. And the bat was like, well, I found stuff, but it's not what you're looking for. I'm like,
don't know what else you want from me.
So, so that I got into a bit of a worrying loop of having just enough money and like just eking out what I had and, you know, getting rid of some crew and trying to scavenge things, and have only just brought myself back into basic, you know, the ability to, supply up and then head off again. It was a fraught time. And then in the version that has been released, I don't know what other stuff in other areas looks like, because they could have completely overhauled that as well, as far as I know.
Yeah, I've just got to the point. I've just got to the point now where I can leave the Reach. So I'm looking forward to seeing what else.
Do you have a favourite port, by the way, of the ones that you've found so far?
Possibly Titania. Because
that was my favourite.
Yeah, which is a port built into a giant flower that is periodically just raided by bees, space bees.
But it's an Art Deco flower rather than an actual floral growth. It's like this man-made thing. It's this beautiful sculpture.
So how much time have you spent with the release version now?
So the release version, I think I've only managed to put in about 3 hours, because it was an evening thing, because I'm not doing anything on it for work. But I was genuinely excited when I saw the snow, because I was kind of like, oh, I could spend some time doing this. And then I went and harassed birds instead, because I'm a terrible person. But yeah, so I think that's probably tomorrow's task, is just scrubbing around the Reach, trying to find things and trying to see. Also for me, to see what's different, because I got pretty far, I would say, with the, just with my own sense of familiarity with it, with the early access version of about a year ago. And so to me, there's also that kind of, I wonder at what point I'm going to start hitting things that aren't at least somewhat familiar, which is kind of cool. Something I was going to ask you was, I know that you weren't keen on the way combat worked in the first one, so I'm kind of interested in how you are faring with that, because I've been blasting things out of the sky.
Yeah, and it's really easy. It's never a difficult. So very early versions on the sea had a bit of a wonky combat system. It's never it's pretty easy and kind of it's fine. I'm not a huge, for me, it's not really the point, to the extent that the point of the combat encounter is kind of the decision you make afterwards when you go through the wreckage or the corpse or whatever it is you've killed, and make decisions about what kind of risks you're going to take about the wreckage.
If it was a particular kind of ship, you can ally yourself with a faction by collecting up its number plate.
Yeah, I've been studiously neutral so far.
Kind of interesting.
But yeah, for me, the interesting decisions are made around combat in these games rather than during, because, you have a heat map bar which fills up when you fire. You can strafe, to kind of shunt yourself in either direction. At least early on, I found some scary stuff looking at the edge of the map, that I've just basically run away from, because that's usually the best option.
Me too.
But, I don't want to die. But the fights against bad trains, I've never found them particularly scary. In fact,
I ended up covered in bees.
Yeah, you get chased by bees. I found that one thing is, early on, I think, and the combat didn't necessarily help a huge amount with this, I struggled a bit to kind of, place myself in the world, because these games have always, had, strangeness lurking at the fringe. And I think, even the beginning of Fallen London is immediately introduces you to how strange that world is. But I think that this is that's almost it's a weird thing to say when the first game is London's fallen into the ground because of bats, and the second one is sail this underground ocean. But this is the most detached from a kind of terrestrial recognizable life, that these games have gotten. And even small things for me initially, like the fact that the train, to be clear, it's basically just the engine of a train. And rather than the back connecting to carriages that the engine would pull, the back is just a big engine itself. And so, it's weird to me. I spent a while looking at it. Maybe this is the weirdest, hair to split, but I spent ages looking at it, figuring out where the people are, because the front of a train engine is just engine, right? Where are the people on this?
I think I just think of it more as a car,
Yeah, for sure. But it's shaped like a steam train engine. And it makes steam train noises. So I spent ages trying to figure out wait, where am I? But
the thing is, because it's a 2D plane and you're looking down from the top, it could extend away from you
it's very deep. Well, so I eventually realized, it's really big. And if you think about where the engineer's, if the engineer's cab is thought of as that's the entire top deck of a boat, then suddenly it kind of makes more sense.
And also, if you look at it in relation to the ports that you visit and how many people those
and how massive how massive the train is. Yeah, it's like, oh, it's a massive train. That makes sense. Well, it makes sense. But like even the fact that, you know, the bumpers on the front of the train are cannons. Like it's just like, it's sort of faintly, it is a sort of, and coupled with the fact that its version of space is, it's just really strange to consider. And that's a wonderful thing to get into and you kind of sink into it. Like the fact that you enter sort of, it has this, you know, sense of the edges of this sort of, you know, crumbling empire. And you find yourself in this like leafy space jungle, you know, the mist and the wind kind of buffeting you. And that is a really strange thing to explain in the context of this is technically a game of flying a spaceship around. And it's not really, it's more dreamlike than that. But that initially I found, you know, the very beginning of the game when you're kind of learning to fight and shoot with the train, there was a quite a strong sense of like, this is like a dream Thomas the Tank Engine is having. I'm not sure where I fit into this. And once you start getting into the ports and meeting the characters and letting that world kind of like bubble up around you, it becomes a lot easier to, I think, to sort of enjoy the atmosphere of it. And it's still a really good delivery mechanism for just sort of self-contained environments that hang off a high concept, which I really like.
I think that stuff has never bothered me. And I think maybe because, the idea always felt like almost it doesn't care about the last 100 years of space exploration or whatever, if you see what I mean. And so like for me, it feels so much more like, you know, when people would write speculative fiction about, you know, oh, well, maybe in space this or maybe in space that. And I'm not saying that you don't also think of it like that, but I think I found it a lot more easy to switch off the parts that don't necessarily 100% fit, you know.
It's a lot simpler than that, honestly. The reason I was struggling to connect at first, and it's because I just couldn't connect what I was being shown to what I was being told. No,
but that's what I mean. It's like, I think at that point, enough of it was fiction that being shown a marker. And also I think it always, I don't know, because you're sort of looking at it almost as if it's this fantasy map, you know, like a celestial map that someone drew who, you know, doesn't have access to hyper specific measurements and things. It's very much, I think I was fine to take the engine as a cipher for something.
Sure.
You see what I mean? Like when you use a counter for
absolutely.
board games.
And that's why for me, that's how I got onto the subject, because that's why for me, the kind of, the fiddly sort of, twitch, specificity of the combat system where you're literally like doing sick power slides in your space train in order to land a cannon shot on an enemy. I don't mind it, but it doesn't quite fit for me because, I think the best thing to do is to see a lot of it as sort of abstract and representative, whereas that's very specific and requires you to think about the facing of your counter and its speed and momentum and so on. So that has been a bit of a tension for me, but I'm very, very much past, you know, that now and really enjoying myself with it. Particularly because I think it's always, and it's, I had this issue when I was talking about Sunless Skies originally as well. Like, it's really hard to explain why the writing is so evocative and the world is so, because if you describe it, you're kind of just giving things away that are best expressed in the ways they are phrased in the game, because that took a lot of time and, you know, expertise to embody in the way that it's embodied.
I think perhaps some of it is that because we're so used to reading things on the internet, and the internet, it prioritizes simple communication in a lot of instances, you know, like news writing. If you start using polysyllabic words too much, you risk alienating part of the audience, or you risk the accusation of being overly, you know, of being elitist or being overly flowery and not communicating what you need to get across, especially things like headlines or the first paragraph of a news article or whatever. Whereas I think in Failbetter's games, there's a genuine delight in finding the exact right word, no matter how obscure or, you know, willfully elitist it might seem in any other context. So I think it's actually about the precision of language and really reveling in it.
Yeah, it's got a great turn of phrase, like, and I think and it's obviously the work of many writers, but it's got a really coherent, I think you're right. It's got a really coherent attention to, nothing is ever, nothing is ever inconsiderately phrased. Like, everything is sort of really, really finely honed in order to kind of like create a really often kind of gruesome image. Like, it's rare, having played a bunch of horror things recently, it's rare that it's delivered simply through a particular phrase, a particular way of phrasing an injury or describing a sensation that's, really affecting. It's also something I think is common to Sunless Skies as well, maybe from London, is like, they're very elegiac games. Like, they're sad without, there's lots of funny sort of moments in them, but there's something sort of, impersonal and sort of, I think sort of melancholic about them. Like, sometimes in a big kind of bombastic kind of romantic way, but they're definitely sort of happy to keep you at a remove and to kind of just sort of encourage you to feel things in a way that I don't know I can think of loads of other games that do. Like the refusal to name characters, for example, just to have you, or very rarely name characters, and to have you kind of have everyone sort of like be sort of.
I mean, like first name kind of.
Yeah, well, you're often meeting, the classic fail better thing is, the ornery ticket collector, never Steve, the pissed off ticket collector. Like this, for me, that always creates this sense of like these characters are like being viewed through like frosty glass or something. Like you get both a really intimate sense of them because the writing is so precise, but also the game sort of keeps you at this remove from them, which I find it's quite poetic. It's very
also,
elegant.
I mean, not the senses, you are, as part of the game, always on the move, and so the lives of people in the ports play out with or without you, if you see what I mean, and you get to poke your head round the door every now and again and see what's changed, or pick someone up and plonk them down somewhere else, but you are not part of those lives. You are at best part of the life that is happening on your ship or train, or, whatever else. And so everything is going on without you. You are by necessity removed.
Yeah. And your own experiences kind of to some extent happen without you as well. Like there's if you load up your own profile, you can see how many members of your crew have ever died. And I moused over it and there's a line like, writing, letters of condolence is becoming rather rote, which is sort of like a lovely, I think that's where I put it. It's like little moments of insight into what the character might be feeling, but they're sort of just left there for you to discover. You're not forced to experience them or consider them more than, it's quite a self-directed experience in that regard.
I think the only exception is the terror system.
Yeah, that's true.
That, and I think it applies to your crew and you as a whole. So I think the sense is actually of the unit being afraid, or the team. Yeah. And then, weird things can start to happen, or bad things can start to happen if you overload your terror meter. So. Yeah.
And you also have terror is a kind of it's a bit like fuel or supplies. It's like a general measure for the train, whereas your nightmares are more specific to you. How far along you are, the nightmare track is something specifically going wrong with, all right, with your understanding of the scary space business.
Yeah. It's very good.
It's very good, really. Like, and I've been sort of impatient to get back to it all day. Actually, it's gotten its hooks into me now. Partly because, and you just mentioned, the life of the cities being a big part of it, and I agree. And something that I've definitely found, maybe just anecdotally, but I've definitely found that returning to ports has been more consistently rewarding than I have found in previous Fail Better things. So, often you return hoping to find a new option that wasn't there before. And there just seem like there are far more moving parts now in terms of things that can be on or off when you go back to a port. And that's really gratifying because it means that, in the middle of maybe doing something relatively rote, like running a trading route between two ports, you then find that there's something that's slightly different. And that that's really key, I think, to making it, making you always pay attention to what's being described.
I think I have that to look forward to because of getting into such a precarious survival situation so early on. Even with the difficulty slightly adjusted, it was very much a kind of eking out the things that I had and just about making it back to port, and then just about going out to a place to get a port report that would then fund me being able to get slightly further.
Yeah.
So, so that's what I spent my first few hours doing. But I think it's testament to the game that I didn't just think, oh, sod it, I'll start a new save file. It was very much, nope, I'm gonna make this work.
Yeah.
And I'm not that kind of player.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely rewards you for keeping pushing at it. It hasn't sort of gotcha'd me with like suddenly running out of something important yet. And I appreciate that a lot because I want to be spooked, but I don't want to be stopped. That's my rule for all things.
Well, all right then.
I was going to talk about Wargroove, which came out this week. So, Wargroove is a Advanced Wars style turn-based strategy game that Chucklefish just released. I remember talking about it on the
Chucklefishing.
Why didn't you write their logo jingle thing?
Because that's a copyright infringement.
It is, and that's why we've both asked and answered the question. So I played it at Res 2 years ago, and I talked about it on the live pod we did way back when. And
was I on that one?
You were. And
don't remember a thing.
and it's just come out. And I really like it. It is a if you basically, obviously PC podcast, so worth explaining that Advance Wars was a kind of lo-fi turn-based tactics game for the Game Boy way back when. This is kind of similar in terms of some core mechanics, like it's about moving across a relatively small map, kind of capturing buildings that generate resources, and then positioning your units to do attacks. And basically in a given turn, every unit can do a move and a thing, and that can be move and capture, move and resupply itself, move and attack, etc. But it feels a lot more sort of elegant than I think Advance Wars was, at least in my memory of it. There are some sort of consistent themes, like unit damage is basically linked to how much health they have in the first case. So attacking first is always better. So when two units attack, you see them rush towards each other, and then whoever's the attacker goes first, and then whoever's left attacks back. And it's, if you're ever frustrated by tactics games with a random element, it's meticulously fair. So there's no chance element in terms of how much damage will be done. It's always based on factors that you can control. So, and those factors are quite deep. So if a unit is standing on a mountain when it attacks, it will have a defensive bonus, which means you'll take less on the return attack. Units also have kind of like rock, paper, scissors style matchups. So knights are very good against archers, I think, and so on. And then every unit also has a condition in which it will do critical damage, so it will do more damage. So pikemen do critical damage if they're standing next to other pikemen. A pikeman being a man holding a 3-foot-long fish.
That will kill you.
Indeed. And like archers do critical damage if they don't move in the turn that they fire. So if you don't have to move them, they'll do a crit. Whereas knights do more damage if they move their maximum movement distance before attacking. And so there's all these different considerations, which are really cool. And it's really like elegant in and of itself and lightweight enough that you pick up the kind of fundamentals quite quickly. But there's loads of units, like there's loads going on. There's sea units, you have mer people, battle turtles, that kind of thing. You've got flying units like harpies and witches and dragons and ground units, which include dogs, which I'm almost avoiding talking about the battle dogs because I talked about them exclusively the first time I talked about it. Yeah. And there's more to the game than battle dogs. However, they're very, very good. There's lots of really good, I will talk about the battle dogs.
I knew it!
Battle dogs are fast and can see very far. So putting a dog on a mountain is how you can tell what your enemy is doing. They also do critical damage if they're attacking someone who's also near another battle dog. And in an extremely good decision by whoever, it's all pixel art, but it's beautifully animated. It's really lovely and charming, very cartoony, cute. The battle dogs when they don't die. Every other unit, if they get defeated in combat, like falls backwards and vanishes and turns into a ghost. And you sometimes see that on the campaign map with the dogs, but in the game, whenever a dog takes enough damage to be removed, it just runs away back the way it came. So they just flee. They always, you never see a dog seriously, wounded, which is very, as it should be.
Good.
But a neat thing is, as overwhelming as that sort of overview can sound, there are a bunch of different factions, but they're basically just skins for all of those units.
Yeah.
So there are like the kind of tree people and, you know, the undead and stuff, and they just have their own versions of it. So the tree people have little battle frogs instead of battle dogs. The undead have, little skeleton dogs, which are very cute. And the thing that makes factions different is your hero. And so in a kind of multiplayer game or a matched game, it's about you lose when you lose your stronghold, which is a big building at the back, or you lose your hero. And the heroes are really, really powerful units that that behave like any other ground unit, but each have a special ability called a groove, which is triggered when they, I think, land enough final blows, or it charges over time as well. And that is kind of what differentiates playstyles to some extent, but it's felt relatively lightweight. But the good thing about that is I think I spoke about this on a previous episode, but it has allowed them to build a kind of matched battle game that is pretty much entirely fair, because hero specifics notwithstanding, it's like chess, both people have the same units.
Yeah.
And the maps in like multiplayer and things are usually symmetrical. So it's very much a kind of just a, quite accessible but interesting thinky tactics game. The best hero for two reasons is Caesar the dog. One reason is because he is a dog who just woofs. He can't talk, but he is for some reason a commander, and I very much appreciate the fact that they don't explain why people will follow this dog's orders. They just do. But also in combat, the dog doesn't do the fighting himself.
To be fair, you have a dog and you follow his orders.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very on point. It's very accurate. When you indicate for Caesar to attack somebody, he runs up to them, barks, and then his two bodyguards appear and then shoot whoever it is with crossbows after patting him on the head. And Caesar just rolls around on his belly in the background having a good time. It's really good. And Caesar's ability is really powerful. He can trigger inspiration in all of the people around him, which allows them to act again, which can be really, really powerful. So, you know, a really good strategy is to flank the dog on all sides with trebuchets and unleash a kind of devastating hail of artillery fire, because everyone's so impressed by the dog.
It's a machine gun dog.
It's very good. It's very good. The only thing about it that I haven't really, it has, and it's really generous as well with the amount of stuff to do. So there's like, there's multiplayer, there's arcade mode, which is basically like a, fighting game style arcade mode where you play battles against other heroes one after another. There's a light plot, but it really is just sort of multiplayer style matched battles. And there's a puzzle mode, which is where you have like one turn to kind of think your way out of a impossible situation, which is really cool. But all of this stuff is unlocked by playing the campaign. And I found the campaign a bit hit and miss. So I wanted to talk about all the fundamentals first, because I think it's really, really solid. And I really like it. But the campaign itself, has good moments, and it certainly teaches you all the basics, but it takes quite a lot of time over teaching you, which I think might be necessary because, you know, there's a lot to figure out initially. But the other reason that the campaign is fairly slow is, it's quite heavy on story early and quite writing heavy and quite cutscene-y. In fact, the whole game is quite cutscene-y, even though arcade mode has quite a lot of talking. And the writing is like often like fine. It's, you know, there are some good jokes, but it's very gentle. It's not ever laugh out loud funny. It's going for charming, but there's a lot of it. And, it's quite a derivative story. Like the characters are very kind of nicely drawn and well realized, but, there's nothing, you know, sort of particularly new or original about the kind of fantasy story it's telling or anything like that.
So it doesn't earn the amount of
time you spend pressing A to, well, I'm playing with a pad, but, you know, clicking to just get through it. Which is a shame because I appreciate that, like, it leans hard on how charming its characters are. And it's that thing for me where it's like, these characters would be basically just as charming just through the way they look and sound and the way they're animated.
Yeah.
They almost don't need the layers of writing and quite a lot of lore in a codex that I feel guilty for not reading, but I also don't really want to.
You love lore. You should be the ideal audience.
I do, but I like feeling like there's something for me to discover when I go into the codex, because I want to know more about the world. Whereas this is very much like, your kingdom has fallen, the bad people are coming, you must go on a journey to find the thing you need to defeat the bad guy. Like, it's a tricky balance of, I don't like lore in a context where the purpose of the story is, as far as I can tell, nostalgia. Like nostalgia for old JRPGs or for a particular type of fantasy story. Like, I don't really need to know more about this world because I feel like I know everything about it already because I've seen so many settings like it. So, but, and also the campaign missions can be quite grueling. Like, they can really become a bit of a slog, and that's a shame when you're using them to unlock the other stuff. But those caveats notwithstanding, it's a really nice, elegant little strategy game.
And there's also the custom map editor, isn't there?
Yeah.
So maybe like if the campaign mode is really not for you, then you could find, I'm assuming the community will turn out some interesting things as well.
Totally, yeah. Like, I can see myself basically keeping on with the campaign until I get really bored, and then just playing arcade mode with whatever characters I happen to have unlocked by that point. Which is, it's great that they've done the thing that I really like strategy game developers doing, which is make sure the fundamentals are strong enough to support 3 different versions of the same game. It's just I sort of wish you had equal access to all of them rather than having to play the campaign to get to them.
They might tweak it.
They might do. Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, Wargroove is really good. And it's also out now. So yeah, kind of awash with surprisingly good games, which is unusual for this time of year, but it's very good.
Excellent.
So we are not going to do the customary full question section this week because it's just me and Pip, and many of you write in with questions that would benefit from the insight of at least one Tom and maybe Alex. But we did think we would answer one question that we got because it's very pertinent to Pip and I, which is from Erin, who writes, "Are you still doing Little Grey Cells?"
Kind of, as in, it is on an annoying hiatus that neither of us planned for, because both of us had changes in work and personal circumstances that basically made sitting down to record a couple of them in a weekend so that we could actually start to create a bit of a backlog just wasn't viable. And so it's one of those things where if this had been a thing that we had planned for, we wouldn't have recorded just that lone episode in a new format. It was more that was the start of something, and then it got derailed, and we kept hoping that it would become underailed and we would suddenly have free time to actually sit and do it. And then that, weeks turned into months kind of thing, which is, I'm genuinely sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about it too. Like, I really love doing it and I'd like to get back to it. Like, I think we did that season 2 episode right at the end of August, and the back 3 months of 2018 were easily the busiest I have ever been. Like, I had a real, run of big projects, so I just haven't had time, and that's so apologies from me.
Sense of the wonders of magazine journalism. Usually we get 4 weeks to produce an issue, and the last couple that I have done have been 3 weeks basically, and so that's been fun.
Yeah, indeed.
Which rather impacts time for anything else, and it's so annoying, and I'm genuinely sorry, and hopefully we can figure something out soon, because we like it as well. Something that I think I would be interested in while we figure that stuff out is if anybody has feedback on whether they liked the new format. That would be interesting.
Think back to August 2018.
Basically, maybe re-download it.
Yeah.
But yeah, because that was us trying to figure out a shape that worked and kept the episodes a manageable size after the episodes of the show itself will fairly soon spiral into things that don't really work for a blow-by-blow recap. So, I think let us know that stuff. That would be genuinely useful. And then we will try and figure something out and make more of a long-term plan for it so it doesn't slip again.
Yeah, totally. And otherwise, we will simply be back with another episode of the Crate and Crowbar, hopefully next Friday, back on the normal schedule. Apologies again, this one was a little bit late. Hope you've enjoyed our mildest indie takes. If you'd like, you'd like to send us very good games. If you'd like to send us a question for next week's episode, you can do so by emailing us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. You can, find our video versions of the podcast at YouTube, on youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar. And thank you as ever to our Patreon backers. If you would like to find out more about the Crate and Crowbar Patreon, you can find it at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. That's all the Earls. I've done all the Earls now. It's time to go away.
Well, indeed. And you can go to the skies. Take to the skies.
Or the ground.
Oh, that's true.
Or indeed, deep below the sea.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you for listening.